the high priest. Who was really responsible for the death of Jesus? After Jesus Christ was arrested, Jewish law dictated that he was to be locked in the temple stockade until a council of priests could hear his case. But instead, the Bible says Jesus was taken directly to the house of High Priest Joseph Caiaphas. What happened next was a hasty indictment of Jesus Christ, which Mark described in his Gospel. The sentencing was carried out under the cloak of darkness. The high priest clearly wanted to get rid of Jesus Christ as soon as possible, and he wanted to do so covertly. First, Jesus was questioned by the ex-high priest and Caiaphas' father-in-law, Annas. Then, after the hearing, he was transferred directly to Caiaphas, who at the time had been serving as high priest for about 12 years. He technically didn't have the power to order a man to death, and in reality, Jesus was only guilty of crimes such as disturbing the peace and some light blasphemy. Regardless, though, Caiaphas charged Jesus with blasphemy and sentenced him to death. Then the high priest sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman judge, to have the sentence carried out. The Romans may have been the ones who killed Jesus, but it was the Jewish high priest of Jerusalem who had a suspicious trial in his home late at night and ordered Jesus to die. It's believed that Caiaphas lived a long life after sentencing the Messiah to death. It's rumored that he perished in 66 AD on the island of Crete from old age. His death wasn't particularly horrific, though he supposedly lived the last of his days in terrible sorrow and regret for what he did to Jesus. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Bobby Drake and Cindy Butler for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or horrible deaths from the Bible. Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea and a ruthless judge who initially exonerated Jesus of any crimes. However, when the crowd erupted and condemned Jesus to death, Pontius gave in and ordered Jesus to be crucified. But what historians know about Pontius Pilate is very little. It's believed that he served in the Roman prefect of Judea between 26 and 36 AD. He was either born in Italy or Scotland. Nobody knows. The first mention of him in a historical, non-biblical record is from Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria in 50 AD. He was described as a terrible judge who took bribes and robbed people. He also forced executions without trial and was exceptionally cruel. Historians don't know how much truth there is to the stories. Helen Bond from the University of Edinburgh School of Divinity said Philo was a dramatic writer. He may have had some facts right, but likely embellished them because he didn't like Pontius. There's one story about Pontius in which he sends soldiers into a crowd of protesters, then the soldiers beat them to death with clubs. Whether he was cruel or not, he was the one who ordered the death of Jesus. Initially, Jesus was sentenced to die by the Jewish high priest Caiaphas, then Pontius carried out the sentence. Historical records don't give clear indication of what happened to Pontius Pilate after the execution. Roman historian Tacitus wrote that he was removed from his office and sent back to Rome for his use of excessive force. But once in Rome, he completely disappeared from all historical accounts. Some traditions say Emperor Caligula executed Pontius and then dumped his body in a river. But just as a quick side note, Pontius Pilate was a real person. Regardless of what your religious belief might be, archaeologists have proved Pilate existed. They found fragments of ancient stone with his name on them in 1961. Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot was the great betrayer. He was one of Jesus Christ's 12 apostles and the one who sold him out to the Romans. He was the treasurer of the group, but the Gospels don't say much else about him. In John 12:6, Judas's shifty character is exposed when he says that he used to steal money from the money box. His role in the death of Jesus came before Pontius Pilate or the high priest. He was responsible for telling the angry priests of Jerusalem and the Jewish elders where they could find Jesus, and Judas did all this for just 30 pieces of silver. After the Last Supper, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane with his 11 loyal apostles. Judas then showed up and identified Jesus with a kiss. This signaled for the troops to act, and Jesus was then carried away to his painful end. The one thing that's for certain is that Judas Iscariot had a miserable death. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Judas died by hanging. Matthew gave an extremely graphic description of how Judas was strung up and hanged until his death. But in the Gospel of Luke, there's a slightly different description of what happened to Judas. Luke said Judas died from falling and bursting open like a fleshy water balloon. Biblical historians think Matthew is talking about the way in which Judas was killed, while Luke, being a doctor, was describing the end result. It went down like this. Judas was hung to die and left in Jerusalem's raging sun. The bacteria in his body gradually broke down his tissue and cells. Eventually he was cut down, but when his body hit the ground, it burst open. There's no contradiction between Matthew and Luke. They just described two different aspects of the same event. Roman Centurion Longinus. A Roman soldier by the name of Longinus was, according to legend, the one who pierced Jesus Christ's side with a spear after he was crucified. It was the day before the Sabbath, and Jewish leaders didn't want the crucified bodies left up. It was an ugly thing to have dead people nailed to crosses on the holiest of days. So soldiers were ordered to take the bodies down. When they came to the first man crucified next to Jesus, he was still alive. The soldiers then broke his legs so that he would die faster. This was supposedly a common practice with Roman crucifixions. By breaking the victim's legs, they died much quicker. When the soldiers reached Jesus, they were shocked to see that he'd already passed away. Rather than break his legs, one of the soldiers stabbed him in the side with a spear to be absolutely sure. And what gushed forth was a mixture of blood and water. There's no biblical account of what the soldier's name was, but it's in the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is considered a forbidden book of the Bible, that his name is revealed to be Longinus. He was a centurion from Cappadocia in Turkey. The forbidden book claims that when Longinus poked Jesus in the side, blood and water squirted him in the eyes, and the liquids from Jesus' body cured his poor eyesight. The experience was enough to turn Longinus into a devoted Christian. Legend has it that because of his new conviction, he was imprisoned by the Romans. Then he became one of the first martyrs by being beheaded. It was said his head remained an important Christian artifact for years. It supposedly had magic powers and was able to heal the blind. King Herod. King Herod was the ruler of Judea between 74 and 4 BC. He ruled while Judea was a Roman territory. Although Judea was technically an independent kingdom, it was still heavily influenced by the Romans. And Herod only came into power because he agreed to be a puppet of Rome. In the Bible, King Herod is depicted as an untrustworthy and bloodthirsty monster. He had nothing to do with Jesus being crucified, but what he did was even worse. The Bible says that just before the baby Jesus came into this world, King Herod learned of the imminent arrival of the Son of God. He was determined to snuff out the Messiah before he could grow into a man. So King Herod went on a mad killing spree, massacring every single infant in Bethlehem. Historians say that the story is entirely fictional. There's no archaeological proof that all the infants in Bethlehem were killed. But what there is proof of is King Herod's viciousness. Historians know he executed one of his wives, and he killed 3 of his children. He did work to expand a temple in Jerusalem, and also saved the Olympic Games during a financial crisis. But he was altogether a ruthless savage. What kind of maniac kills 3 of their own children? Although historians say Herod didn't kill every baby, he was definitely the kind of person who would have done it. King Herod's ending was grim, to say the least. Some might say he got what he deserved for trying to kill Jesus as a baby. Scientists think he may have died from gonorrhea complications or kidney failure. Jan Hirschman from the University of Washington said the proof is in the descriptions of King Herod's last days. Historical records show that he had intense itching and pain in his intestines. He had a difficult time breathing and frequently suffered convulsions. He also had gangrene of the genitalia. Jan Hirschman said the symptoms suggest chronic kidney disease, but it could have also been an extreme case of gonorrhea. How do you think King Herod really died? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. Now let's move on to number 3, the death of Emperor Tiberius. Emperor Tiberius. It's unclear how much Emperor Tiberius was involved in the death of Jesus Christ. Tiberius was the emperor of Rome from 14 to 37 AD. The Gospels never specifically say that Emperor Tiberius was involved in orchestrating Jesus Christ's execution. Governor Pilate wouldn't have needed to clear the crucifixion with the big man in Rome. It may not seem like it today, but 2,000 years ago, Judea was far away from the business of Rome. It's not like they phoned each other to talk about what was going on. News took a long time to reach places, so Tiberius may not have known about Jesus. Later, Roman writers said the emperors of Rome didn't know much about Jesus for years after his death. But in 64 AD, about 30 years later, Emperor Nero allegedly blamed Jesus' followers for the fire that enveloped Rome. Whether Tiberius was involved in killing Jesus or not, he suffered a gruesome death. In 37 AD, the second emperor of Rome died at the age of 78. Ancient Roman historians claimed that Tiberius was a miserable ruler. He was paranoid and killed his own senators. He also indulged in a life of perversion and sin. He retired to the island of Capri long before his death, leaving the trials and tribulations of Rome behind. He ruled from a distance, with his senators in charge of the day-to-day operations of the empire. But Tiberius suddenly fell ill. On the 16th of March, he stopped breathing and he was assumed to be dead. Later that same day, though, the emperor regained consciousness. His great-nephew, the next in line to rule, then smothered him to death with a pillow. And the murderer was none other than Caligula, one of the worst Roman rulers that ever lived. The Sanhedrin. In the days that Jesus Christ lived 2,000 years ago, the land of Israel was ruled by tribunals known as the Sanhedrin. There were two different types of tribunals. There was the Lesser Sanhedrin, which was kind of like a group of statesmen who presided over the laws of each city. Every city in Judea had one of these organizations, usually consisting of 23 judges. The Great Sanhedrin was the ancient Judean version of the Supreme Court. Lesser courts would take serious cases to the Great Sanhedrin, which consisted of a whopping 71 judges. Anything that couldn't be resolved in a lesser court was moved to the bigger one. The Great Sanhedrin held court in the temple in Jerusalem, within a building known as the Hall of Hewn Stones. It was the most important government building in the city, and the 71 judges convened every day, except on the Sabbath and on Jewish festivals. With the rise in Jewish persecution, especially at the hands of the Romans in the 200s AD, they changed their name and moved to Galilee in an attempt to survive. The last big decision made by the Great Sanhedrin was in 358 AD. Their final decision was the establishment of the Hebrew calendar. They were then obliterated by the Eastern Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. It's impossible to describe the ways in which the judges of the Great Sanhedrin died because there were just way too many of them. In the Bible, there are no detailed descriptions of the members of the tribunal. That being said, the Sanhedrin is mentioned 22 times in the Greek New Testament, mostly in relation to the trial of Jesus, in which he was condemned, but also in connection with several other deaths. And one of the most notorious deaths decreed by the tribunal, other than Jesus' crucifixion, was the stoning of Saint Stephen. Stephen was the first Christian martyr, and as it says in the Acts of Apostles, he angered the Jews of Jerusalem by preaching blasphemous ideas at synagogues related to Jesus' teachings. When he was brought to trial before the Great Sanhedrin, Stephen denounced Jewish authorities, and in response, he was sentenced to die by stoning. Stephen was then taken outside and people threw rocks at him until he stopped breathing. The Apostle Peter. The Apostle Peter wasn't a betrayer to Jesus Christ in the way that Judas Iscariot was, but he did act a little suspiciously when Jesus Christ was taken away to be judged by the high priest. Judas struggled with greed, while it seems Peter struggled with cowardice. In the Bible, Jesus tells Peter, "Before this very night is through, you will deny me 3 times." Peter responded by saying, "Even if I must die with you, I will never deny you." But that very night, Jesus was taken away and Peter pretended that he didn't know Jesus. It was like getting caught doing something bad with your friend and then completely denying you even know the person. After Judas identified Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was taken to the high priest, and while things were going on inside, Peter waited in the courtyard. A servant girl asked if he was one of the disciples, and Peter said no. 2 other people came along, asking if he was with Jesus, and each time, he denied being associated in any way with the Messiah. Peter did feel bad and later repented, but he still denied Jesus at one of the ministry's most critical moments. After the death of Jesus Christ, Peter became one of the most important people in the early church. But for his continued dedication to Jesus Christ and his teachings, Peter received a brutal death. Historical accounts say that Peter was sentenced to die by Emperor Nero in Rome in the year 64 AD. By this time, almost all of the other apostles had already been martyred. The time and manner of Peter's death had been confirmed by several different sources. Emperor Nero wanted to crucify him, killing Peter in the same way his savior had died. But Peter didn't think himself worthy to be crucified in the same way as Jesus, so he was crucified upside down. Do you think it would be worse to die from a normal crucifixion or an upside-down one like what happened to Peter? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.